40 years. 40 years of leading millions of people through a desert. And Moses never got to see the ending. This is the most heartbreaking story in the Bible that nobody talks about. Moses was the hero. He stood up to Pharaoh. He parted the Red Sea. He brought down the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai. He led Israel through 40 years of wilderness, watching an entire generation die off until their children were ready to enter the Promised Land. 40 years of complaints. 40 years of rebellion. 40 years of people doubting him, questioning him, wanting to go back to Egypt. But Moses kept going. He kept leading. He kept interceding between God and a stubborn people. And finally, after 4 decades, they reached the border. The Promised Land was right there. The finish line, the goal, everything he'd worked for. And God said no. Deuteronomy 34. God took Moses up to Mount Nebo, showed him the entire Promised Land spread out below, every valley, every city, the land flowing with milk and honey. And God said, "This is the land I promised. You can see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Moses died on that mountain, within sight of the destination. After 40 years of leading, he never took a single step into the Promised Land. Why? One mistake. Numbers 20. The people were complaining, again, about no water. God told Moses, "Speak to the rock and it will pour out water." But Moses was fed up, frustrated, angry. He struck the rock twice with his staff instead of speaking to it. Water came out. The people got what they needed, but Moses disobeyed. And God said, "Because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy, you will not bring this community into the land I'm giving them." One moment of frustration, one act of disobedience. After 40 years of faithful service, the punishment seems harsh, but here's what makes it devastating. Moses didn't argue. He didn't beg. He accepted it. He climbed that mountain knowing he'd never come down. He looked at the Promised Land knowing he'd never walk in it. And then he died, alone on a mountain, buried by God himself in an unmarked grave. The man who brought Israel out of slavery never saw them enter freedom. But here's the twist most people miss. Moses did enter the Promised Land. 1,500 years later, Matthew 17, the Transfiguration. Jesus stood on a mountain with Peter, James, and John. And who appeared beside him? Moses and Elijah. Moses finally stood in the Promised Land, not leading Israel, but standing with Jesus. The true Promised Land wasn't a place, it was a person. Sometimes God says no to what we want because he's saving us for something greater. Moses led people to earthly freedom. Jesus leads us to eternal freedom. The man who never entered the land became the man who stood with the Savior. 40 years of leading, one sin, but an eternal redemption.